Life and death, it's all a dance. Talking love and giving chance. Laughs and tears, we're here to share. Join us now, we're always there.
Jenna, how are you today?
I'm okay. I am fighting to find a glimmer. That is where I'm at, but that's okay. There are days, and that's okay.
Especially during these difficult winter months. Hopefully, this podcast will come out when it's still wintertime and not when it is summertime, because that would be a very long time down the road.
Hey, Noelle, I just thought of a great thing that you may want to tell our audience. Can you please tell them what you informed me of not too long ago that seems to be everywhere in the wonderful area of the UK that you live in that made me almost ill? And like, we have squirrels that are around our house and, you know, cats. Noelle, what's hanging around the house?
We live on a little bit of a rural countryside piece of land.
It's not making it any better. It's not.
We have an abundance of wildlife here. We have pheasants, we have some squirrels, we have birds. The British love bird watching, by the way. So anyway, we have foxes. We had a peacock that was living that just showed up one day.
Forgot about the peacock. That actually was really cool.
Yeah, it was killed by a fox. That was depressing. That was a bad day.
What?
But we also have, when it gets cold, we have some furry friends that do like to hang out upstairs in
So,
our
like,
loft.
they're not furry. They're not furry.
So my very large rescue dog, we just got 2 cockapoo puppies, and he is terrified of them. Like,
I actually love how you're completely
we're getting there. We're circling the airport. We will
you're
land.
trying to make it sound very pretty and sweet.
We got the puppies, like, 3 weeks ago, and Radar is he's a little perturbed by those puppies' existence in his home. He's fine with it, like, he's not aggressive toward them, but he certainly doesn't wanna play with them, which is what I thought he would wanna do, because they're these little playful puppies that just all they wanna do is be his friend. And so he's really struggling. We're getting there, but it's a
Yeah.
slow and steady process. So we walk across the lawn to go to the kitchen, and Radar and I were on our way over to the kitchen, and all of a sudden I noticed that he was chasing something, and
There it is.
keep in
Here.
mind, he hasn't really been in a playful mood recently. So I was like, "Oh,
Right.
that's weird. I wonder what he's chasing." Now, mind you, Radar wouldn't know what to do if he caught an animal. He would have absolutely no clue. He does not
Right.
have the instinct in him. And so I very slowly and hesitantly walked over to find him playing with a very large, most likely injured rat that was just probably trying to make its
Like,
way across the lawn. And the screeching sound that the rat was making is something that lives in my nightmares. And Radar just kept, like, going back and forth, like, he just was playing, like, he was just having a good time. The rat was not having a good time from what the sound that was coming out of it.
that's, like, so sickening.
And I went up to look at it, and I still, like, have the heebie-jeebies just from thinking about it.
I do think it's sweet that you attempted to help-ish the rat.
I just didn't want Radar to actually, like, I didn't want him to, like, pick it up or do anything to it, which he didn't. Like, he I don't know if this rat just was, like, startled by the fact that Radar caught up with it, because he chases them all the time.
Yeah.
Mice, rats, birds, like, every so often, he'll just chase whatever he hears, like, rustling through the leaves. It's a wildlife experience. But,
No.
you were the one that sent me a text and said, "I think it's hilarious that Radar is terrified of these tiny little puppies, and yet he'll play with the rat." And I think it was because the rat, like, he was chasing it, and it wasn't chasing him, which
That
the
makes
puppies
sense.
chasing.
Yes.
So, Jenna, who are we having on today?
So today, my friend Jasmine is coming on, and she is one of the most intentional people that I know. And that's something that I've never really picked up on with people before. Like, I shouldn't say that. It's something I've not recognized, but she has completely opened my eyes. She finds every last detail about things like so fascinating. And I love that. We are just programmed. Well, I shouldn't speak for our audience and you, but with me, I'm always like 15 steps ahead and I'm
Right.
always adding on. Like, I have to do this, this, this.
So would you say she is very effective at living in the moment and
Yes.
noticing the small details?
Yes, and it's amazing to me. So she and I met, oh my, 3 years ago, doing my sex education program. We met, I wanna say almost the first day. We were put in like a breakout room to talk, and we did, and we sort of just clicked.
Obviously, our title is Life and Death. We are exploring all of the stuff in between because life encompasses quite a bit. We're really leaning into the life.
Leaning into the life today and living and kind of seeing that your life can begin at any point.
Hi, Jasmine. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Noelle.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's my first podcast, so bear with me.
Same.
What? I mean, who else would you wanna start with? I kind of explained how you and I met doing our sex education program and how on text, looking at our lives, we would be like polar opposite humans in every way. Well, not in every way, but in a lot of ways. So that was kind of what we talked about. So if you want to give a little bit of why you're here.
Well, I think I'll talk about what I've been thinking about right now and kind of what led me here, I guess. So, of course, meeting Jenna, such a beautiful person and who's gotten me through, especially the last 3 years. Is one of the most wonderful people who've just brought, like as Jenna said, light into my life, especially. And to have somebody who's just so supportive and communicative and open and just very willing to hold space for me, especially being in a body that I'm in, being women who are now seen as less than, being in a Black body that is very much dehumanized in the current space. Um, yeah, Jenna, I mean, to get to this point, Jenna has gotten me through quite a bit as well, but it's just been great to have such a supportive friend who has the kind of the experience and the context and the knowledge that a lot of my other people in my community just don't have. Maybe I'll talk a little about my sex ed journey, I guess, and where I am now. So, I mean, by day, I'm a nonprofit worker. What really kind of led me into the sex ed field, I guess, and thinking about dating and relationships in our 30s, these things have kind of collided in an interesting mix right now, too. Um, I was super burnt out by a software engineering program that I did locally during the pandemic, right at the onset of the pandemic. Also living in a multi generational household as well with two other women in their 80s and 70s. Um, in such a small space. So I did this program trying to shift into tech, being so burnt out by my nonprofit job, and just finding myself reading so many texts. And so I think one of the first things that I read was, I think it's The Erotic Mind or The Erotic Body or The Erotic Mind. Reading that and just kind of finding myself reading texts. And my therapist eventually transitioned to becoming a sex therapist as well. And he said, you know what, Jasmine, you're reading all these books. Like, why not just go into the sex ed program and just kind of see what kind of comes of it? Because I've just been in this weird kind of career limbo, I guess. So, fast forward to meeting Jenna, having had also a very transformative relationship in the last year, being able to engage in a long term relationship with someone and discovering sex for the first time at 35. And also someone who is in the poly space as well. Also recognizing a little bit of my kinkiness, a lot of my kinkiness as well. So in the last year, especially as we fast forward from this kind of sex ed training to my own sexual development and journey, as well as figuring out what it's like to date and have relationships in a space where, or in a culture that we're not taught to have relationships. We're not taught how to date. We're not taught to have relationships. And of course, we're not taught to be able to relate to one another. So I find myself in this space now of dating for the first for 5 or 6 months for the first time in my adult life, and that being a journey
And
for
what I
me.
love that I've recognized being a part of your journey is you do not settle.
Yeah.
You are very open to meeting a wide variety of people and very open to them. But it's not even that you don't settle, it's more of you know what you want, you know who you want in your life, and you value your time. And if that does not fit, you're well aware of that.
I was thinking about this with my therapist too, but I think what you're pointing towards is just the intentionality. I
Yes.
am trying to move through not just like the romantic space intentionally, but also in terms of platonic friendships too. But I think I'm in a space, and having Jenna as a soundboard is super helpful to kind of help me recognize the perception versus the reality of like what I'm seeing in these relationships too. But really trying to move through my life and move through my future romantic connections with intention. But I think the biggest thing right now is intentionally discovering my own kinkiness. And, it was a conversation that I had with this great fetish performers, porn star, also slash psychotherapist back in the summer, where she recognized that I'm also cautiously moving into my relationships as well.
Oh, that's very true. That's actually a perfect word.
Yeah, I think cautiousness and intentionality are the two biggest
Yes.
things that are in my space right now. And of course, being on here is a huge risk within itself. And having like, so many women in my life too, cishet women especially, having met so many who have dealt with their own traumas, me coming through my own trauma, being a neurodivergent human being as well, really making sure to prioritize emotional and physical safety, especially in this time that I have in between trying to figure out what to do next, amplifying again that cautiousness and intentionality.
With the safety, how do you go about doing that? So how would you advise maybe someone younger that's listening or someone who's just starting out dating, actually whatever age they are? What do you kind of look at for that to find the safety?
Well, I wish I could just vet every man that I'm with my therapist. Like, I wish every woman had access to that. And having been with someone who kind of went through that process with me and was seen by my therapist, I've only just become to feel safe in my body, or safer. That took years and years of therapy just to get to that space of groundedness in my own body. I think for safety, both physical and emotional, for that to kind of be set, you really need to have some sort of internalized kind of groundedness and stability, um, to be able to move through the dating realm. I am a little bit glad that I also waited as long as I did to date, because had I dated at 25, being the insecure and lonely and just all of the things that come with being at 25, it's kind of bittersweet. It's like, oh man, I really just want the divorced dads right now. But, I wouldn't have known that at 25, but
Who told
also
you that, Jasmine? Who told you that?
but yeah, I think it's really important, and I think um I recognize my privilege in having been able to do the emotional work with a therapist for almost a decade, to be able to undo or at least work through the traumas of my family dynamics, of the way I grew up as a third culture kid traveling around the world, and assimilating, or not really doing very well at assimilating in American culture. But really, being a therapized human is something that I think would be an asset for anybody going to this dating space, making sure that they don't trigger themselves or re trigger themselves in meeting other men. In terms of physical safety, that's a paramount thing for me, because if I don't feel physically safe, I won't be embodied. I won't be able to engage with whatever partner or whoever that I'm with. Um, One of the more interesting things that I've done, I got a Google Voice number in case, somebody just kind of pops off or tries to, like push past the boundaries. But that little extra piece of privacy of, like, hey, there is distance, there are boundaries, in that kind of space.
So before Jasmine goes on a date or goes to meet somebody, I will get a text because I've told her to do this. And she's like, if you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the cops. This is where I'm at. But the reality of that is that's incredibly smart, I think, to
Absolutely.
utilize that feature even on your phone where you can drop a pin. I know exactly where you're at. Even being here and you're there, I'm able to reach out to somebody if needed. And I think that's an incredibly, incredibly smart thing for anybody at any age to do.
Jasmine, two things. The first thing, before we came on here, Jenna said, Jasmine is so cool. I can't even explain it. And she's so right. You're so awesome. The second thing is, it's really interesting, some of the things that you're saying about working through some of your own triggers and other things in your 20s before getting to this point in your 30s. Because another thing that I think it's amazing to recognize what we internally go through and our own personal discovery or journey in dating. But I also think because I wasn't healed or hadn't worked through some of my issues, I probably did a lot of damage to people that I've dated as well. And that's something that I admire you so much for, because I think you are so level-headed in approaching dating, and I'm envious of you. I think it's amazing. And even in my relationship now, I'm married to my wife, and there are things that I think both of us are like, God, we we need to do better at this. So you are amazing. And Jenna was right. You are so cool.
Oh, no, you give me too much credit because I'm still going through the fumbling process of like seeing people out in the wild. So I'll give you an example. I went on a field date with someone a few months back, and they happened to show up at a kink event 3 months later. And so it's like, so I'm still like trying to navigate the waters of communication and honoring myself at the same time. Because I've met just a very slew of interesting men so far, as Jenna knows. Hopefully, I
I
won't.
can't wait for the stories. I like literally wait by my phone. I'm like, you better text me in seconds you get home. I mean, first, so I know you're safe, but also I need the stories. So thanks.
Yeah. Also recognizing like there's a time and a place for this thing to be said. And when it feels good in my body, I'm going to say it, but I'm also not going to continue this relationship if it does not feel good in my body anymore.
And that's something that I think like present day dating, especially with the internet and dating apps, how often is it that people just sort of like ghost each other and aren't clear with their intentions or aren't clear with how they feel about something? It just I mean, it's amazing just some of the things that you've said and some of the ways that you're open about your process. Was there a turning point like where you decided that you wanted to start exploring the dating world, or was it just sort of like as you were working through therapy that you decided that you were ready?
It was a combination of therapy and also being in a really healing relationship in the year and a half to be able to work on myself, like even just being comfortable with physical intimacy and touch. Um, I had reached a point where I was comfortable with that, being able to express my wants and my needs in and outside of the bedroom, and having actually achieved more confidence through that therapized work, if that makes sense. And it would have also felt like a crutch to continue the relationship that I had within the last year and a half. It ended amicably. It was beautiful. I respect the person so just immensely, and I don't think they realized how much they changed my life in that process. But because of that, I realized like, hey, this was great. I've, been able to work through the things that I've needed to work through. It's been pleasurable for the both of us. But it's time for me to kind of explore. And so it was really the ending of that relationship in the last 5 months, I guess, of being in the wild. So I'm still super new to the dating world. But it was really at that point, where I just felt like continuing seeing this person would not have allowed any more emotional development had we continued the relationship.
I truly have no one else in my life that is like Jasmine, and it's so refreshing for me to be able to talk to her about things so openly as well. So while she was throwing all the credit at me, I'm giving that back to her. But do have a question for you. So how important with this process was finding the right support? So the right therapist, the right support network. Are
Yeah.
these things that you would have been able to talk about 2 years ago?
Yeah, I don't think any of my personal or sexual development would have happened in the last 2 years had it not been for the current therapist that I have. I've been seeing and been lucky enough to see a great therapist for the last 10 years of my life when I went through a pretty debilitating mental or just an episode within itself. And also having the destruction of my 20 something relationships happen at the same time. A pretty just like life changing kind of career ending, and also pretty tumultuous moment in my life in 25. And I had met my therapist in a time of crisis when that happened. And we've been together ever since. But I don't think I wouldn't have seen myself who I am 2 years ago to where I am now and being comfortable in my body. Question about support. Um, I mean, also being chemically balanced as well, if we're going to talk about being a neurodivergent human being.
Right.
I think if it hadn't been for also the cultural shift in the world of work, where we are now remote working as well, um, I don't think I would have also been in that same space or be in the current space that I'm in, where I have the time and the effort and the care team really to be able to manage myself. I think it's very important if folks neurodivergent or dealing with their own traumas or whatever kind of things that they may have, because everybody has everything, having some sort of external kind of support network that is able to look into your life as a third party is very important. But also being physically well too. I think this is the healthiest that I've been in my adult life, and I think that's attributed to being in the place that I am as well. So a combination of a cultural shift that's happened and focusing on my mental health and physical well-being as well in that process too.
So this is what I'm throwing out there because I can already see the gears of some people that may not be as comfortable talking
Mhm.
about kink and
Mhm.
sexuality as you and I are.
Mhm.
Can you give a little bit of an overview as to what you mean when you say kink?
My definition of kink, I guess, which is probably going to be completely off base, but I think it's recognizing this definition within myself that there can be some spiciness to my life, whether it's sexual or otherwise. It doesn't have to be in the context of like severe or sadistic, power dynamics or anything
And I
like
think
that.
that is exactly what I wanted you to point out.
But yes, that idea that, we are all different and there are certain things that kind of turn on the ons and turn off the offs for us. There are just different things that work for my body that maybe would be outside of the vanilla context of how we see PIV sex in the current cultural kind of context that we're in. And recognizing that there are different ways to engage in sexuality that don't necessarily gear towards this goal oriented result of orgasm. Ways to also, in my own kinky journey, realizing how much kinkiness is more than just sex. It's not really just sex. It can be a way to kind of move through your own internal traumas or internal things that are going on and producing lots of happy chemicals in the process too. And also being mutually symbiotic for your partner or play partner that you're with.
I love that you said that because that's exactly what I think of with kink is safety.
Yeah.
Um, it's a safe space, and I think people hear about or the 50 shades of gray kind of kink of it, and it's
Mhm.
more about pain or dominance.
When we're thinking about kink, and I've been thinking about it as well in my own context too, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end.
Perfect.
You
I
go
love
into a
that.
scene where you've negotiated. I mean, the top and the bottom have negotiated what is going to happen, how it's going to happen, and of course, safe words. But this is not people coming together just having open sex randomly with no safety and all of that. None of that at all. When you're thinking about often in these kinky spaces too, if there are set spaces for that in whatever areas or towns that you're in, um, it could sometimes be the only place where someone can feel safe
Yes.
to be in their body, safe to be able to express themselves. um, and I mean, you are carrying out some sort of scenario. This is not just like, hey, I'm Joe off the beaten path. My wife, she's great. You can sleep with her. All of the things.
Got
No,
it. Right, right,
there's
right, right.
much more safety. Hopefully, if it's a great space, and communication that is involved between the two humans or the multiple humans who are about to engage in whatever activity they're going to engage in. So I see kink as more structured depending upon what you're actually going to engage in and what kind of partner or what kind of power dynamic you're going to have in that scenario too. Um, so it's a whole power dynamic thing. It's a
Right.
whole like skill level thing. But it's very structured. At least that's how I see it. And Jenna, you know better than me. You're much better at like absorbing the information. But
I am just the information person. Okay. Jasmine is the goer, the doer. I am more of the information person.
yeah, I like to think in like the last few months, like if there's something that I'm interested in, I'm going to go after it, be in that space, inject myself in that space, and see like, okay,
Okay.
does this feel good to me? I'll take this piece, maybe that piece. But I definitely don't want a vanilla sex life as well. But I'm also intentionally going into this kind of kinky space or these kinky spaces or kinky friendships, um, because I'm just not ready yet to be in that kind of poly curious or poly kind of dynamic. And also life stages that we're in too. Again, I'm just kind of exploring myself for the first time. But also recognizing that, I'm trying to prepare for a move if that ever happens, going abroad.
Where are you going abroad?
TBD on that if that actually happens. The pie in the sky dream is to end up in Oceania, and I guess it'll have to be Europe if that's going to happen too. But new governments, new things, all things happen. So really, just not having the time to be able to invest or to be held accountable by someone else in a long-term committed relationship right now. Which is really, I think that is something that's echoed in so many of the dating dynamics that are out right now too, where people are looking for casual connection, but I feel like in my own casual connections, there can be intimacy and connection built within that kind of space. It's not just, I think people forget that even in their platonic relationships too. I think it's possible to have casual connection or casual dating connection being a comet, or just, knowing that you can still build that kind of intimacy with someone, even if it's not necessarily in a committed long-term relationship.
It's not something where you have to have sex or you have to engage. Is that correct, Jasmine?
That's correct. Not at all. It's all consent based. I mean, the word consent should come up in this conversation at some point as well.
Absolutely.
This is why we also have people who are sex educators, life coaches with sex focus. This is why we have sex therapists too, to be able to help you how to move through those relationships in a healthy way. And I think that healthy part is something that we're just missing holistically in the current context that we're in terms of both our platonic and romantic relationships. But yeah, it's just been really interesting to kind of recognize, like, we're not taught how to date. We're not taught how to love. We devalue love. We even though in our music, in our culture, and all of the things, like, that's something that we all ultimately strive for, but in our day-to-day kind of moving through the world, there is no loving kindness. And if we all learned how to love each other, do you think the world would have been such a different place? And also recognizing the patriarchy too, that it's mostly like these cishet white men who are the ones discussing love, discussing relationship, discussing these things, perpetuating, these concepts.
I have the most important question of the day.
Yeah.
What has been the best coffee flavor that you have drank recently?
Oh, I had something at a Panamanian coffee shop, which is my go-to date spot. It's called an orange raspadura, which is like orange shavings and I think a hint of some sort of fruitiness in there too. So think like super floral kind of latte kind of mix.
And since you mentioned dates, where would you advise someone to maybe have a first date? First time
Oh
they're
my
meeting
gosh.
somebody.
Oh geez. Definitely somewhere public. I think all the things that like Dr. Google says. Definitely somewhere open, somewhere public, obviously dropping a pin or letting a friend know where you are. I went on one date, on a series of dates with someone, where we just went to this little like boutique kind of store with like lots of cool snacks and different things. Think like an upscale bodega. And we just got a whole bunch of snacks, went to a local park, and just ate all the snacks and enjoyed the different flavors and the different tastes. And we both got what we wanted. We both got to share what we wanted to. Like, that's my ultimate date, is to be able to kind of share different tastes and different experiences while also experiencing something new with a new taste with a new person as well.
I love that you take every single thing in rather than just cruising through life. And
Yeah.
that's what you have taught me, is to like take my time and enjoy things.
Well, I mean, whether I'm successfully doing it, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think we have such a hard time being content with where we are, and contentment is viewed as being bad. It's always like this kind of hyper capitalist, like, growth mindset of like, we got to go to the next thing, or we've got to do better, we've got to do this. And having gone through a mental health crisis of my own where I couldn't do basic things for myself, I think people take for granted the ability to do the basic things in their lives.
And I think Noelle and I can sort of jump in there with our own kind of battles with some mental health things and just going through Noelle's parents passing away, my dad passing away, different situations we've had in our past, how much that affects you. And I do think it gives you another understanding of the little things in a caring relationship that otherwise maybe we took for granted before.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, I think, people view that as boredom. It's not boring to me that I can pay my bills on time, or that I can like put dishes in the dishwasher and, do them for me in the place that I'm able to pay for myself. I value those things so much. And I just wish people could see that. But also being in this space too, Jenna, where you recognize as well, it's like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I've only just begun to be in a space where I'm allowing myself to be comfortable, but also recognizing that it's okay to like buy that coffee or buy that pillow that like will actually help me sleep better.
When I'm working with people, I think that is almost the first thing that I try to work on, is staying present and enjoying the moments rather than thinking 5 steps ahead. And I have had to work on that immensely, because I always lived for, well, if I do this, what's going to happen? If I do this, what's going to happen in 5 years, 10
Yeah.
years? And it took losing very close friends to recognize, why am I doing that? Like, why am I skipping ahead from living?
Jasmine, I've known you for like 27 minutes, but you are like a walking, living, breathing example of like living in the moment. You can tell. Like, you actually take it all in. And I think that's what, like Jenna said, most people strive to be. I think just your awareness, just what you said about being able to like pay the bills and have your dishes washed, like that, those are such small things that we do take for granted and that we lose sight of.
I mean, I still have my existential crisis too that I've had since like at 25.
Well, that's reassuring. I'm glad to know.
You know, every day it's like, are the dishes washed? Should I pay this bill? What the fuck am I doing with my life? Like that's usually the rigmarole in my head as I'm doing my day job. I really value like at least the few like connections that I have in my little area as well. But I understand it's coming from a place of privilege too. But sometimes I wish people have been able to get access to the care that I've been given to be able to emotionally work through my own shit. Because I find that people are still in my community or outside of it as well. They believe in community and all of the things, but they have their own hurts and their own traumas, and I can't help them through that. I can only be there for them, and I just wish that the people in my community that I was connected to were able to work through their feelings in a way that I have been.
I think too, and I obviously it's easy for me to say because I live a life of privilege as well, but I think not only have you perhaps had the access, but it takes actually taking the access and working with it. Like, you've actively gone through therapy, you've actively worked on a lot of these things. And I think sometimes that's the key, because even if you have access, some people don't, either aren't at the place where they know how to help themselves or to use that access to get the help that they need. And I think, again, in hearing your story, it's amazing that you've pushed through so many barriers, because I'm a huge proponent of therapy, but I'm not currently in therapy. And I have been with different therapists over the years, but the fact that you've had one for 10 years is incredible. And that, as much as it's amazing that you've had that access, you've also, I think, deserved the credit for actually taking that upon yourself to like continue doing the work.
And that's one thing that I've noticed about you. Like, you recognize that you need it, and you're not putting it in the back burner. You're not saying, but I should be doing this. Like, I know I do that a lot of times where I'm like, I should be doing this errand rather than taking 50 minutes to have a conversation with another coach, or allowing myself that space where I can work through my problems rather than saying, but I have to do this. And I love how you make that a priority in your life. And again, it's absolutely with the privilege. And I do have to say, and I battled with this, helping people. Like, I wish I could help people. Well, I do help people for free, but all the people for free, because I just think it's such a huge gift to be able to support somebody. And I feel like everybody deserves to be supported. So Jasmine, for everything that we've been talking about, what piece of advice would you give somebody that was maybe Jasmine starting out in this journey? If someone else is where you were 10 years ago, 3 years ago, what advice would you give that person?
I would say just start working through your shit as soon as you can. Whether that's with a counselor or your local priest or, whatever that is. Yeah, I think you really have to unpack the first 18 years of your life or the first 22 years of your life before you can actually move on to the next second or third part of your life. Yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of what Noelle did with writing the book. We talked about that, how she wrote a book about her parents passing away and kind of the journey that she has been on. And we've talked about how that kind of made an impact for you. And you can tell a little bit more, just what that did for you to progress, or that it was difficult to do, but you valued that step.
Oh yeah, I think it was like hugely cathartic. So I was writing whenever my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer, and then throughout losing her and then losing my dad. And so I had gone back to my old blog posts and then wrote kind of my present day thoughts on what's changed over the course of the last 10 years. And I think there would have been a part of me that maybe even 5 years ago would have been like, I'm not going down that road. Like, I don't want to read that. I don't want to dive back into that, but it was a necessary step that I had to take in order to, I think, see the progress that I've made, because sometimes it's really hard to see, especially with grief. and other, similar scenarios where it's not necessarily linear and it's something that you think that you're doing really well one day and then the next day you're 12 steps behind where you thought you were. And so I think that was, hugely eye-opening in getting me, I think, to the next step and to making me feel like I have made progress and that my wife is now pregnant. So we're going into this next step, like this next stage of life. And it's weird. I've said to many people, it feels very serendipitous that I've just finished, kind of putting a bow on the story and the chapter that I've just left with my parents, and now I'm going into the chapter of becoming a parent. Obviously, not leaving them behind by any means, but I think it was absolutely necessary to sort of face all of those feelings and all of those emotions. My brother just read the book because he had said as well he didn't know if it was something that he wanted to do, and I would have respected that either way. But he had said, he was like, I'm really glad that you documented that, and a lot of that stuff are things that I would have loved to have just forgotten and shoved, down and never thought about again. But it was worth that to kind of go back and remember the great things about mom and dad, because it was very much written when they were alive. So I think that was, it was, I don't know if I answered your question, Jenna, but
all I'm getting from that is how completely different all three of us are, but we're kind of tied together by having things in our past, working through them and getting to this place where we can sit here and openly talk about these things is just amazing to me. Because I know I would not have been able to my whole life. And as Jasmine said, you wouldn't have been able to talk about these things maybe a few years ago, and the same with Noelle. And I just love that we're all in this space. And that's kind of what I wanted to accomplish, or we, with the podcast, is just allowing people to have this space.
Now, to wrap it up, Jasmine, we came across something called a glimmer, which apparently is the opposite of a trigger. And it sounds like you are, I think you live your life finding the glimmers from what I can tell in our, again, now 37 minutes of friendship. So we like to end on a glimmer. So who wants to go first? Jenna.
I guess I will. So I was sitting here because I was not having the best day. So I was having a hard time thinking about a glimmer, and then it just kind of hit me. Like, I'm literally ready to start crying because I am just there. Look at your face, Noelle.
Make baked ziti again?
No.
Okay.
No. Wait, I'm not going to cry, but I could potentially. The fact that I have both, like, okay, you go first, Noelle. Go first.
No, go on. Come on.
No,
Jenna.
I can't. You do it.
Let's show our emotions. Go on.
Thanks. Because there are my emotions. That's why. The fact that I am behind a phone like all the time talking to both of you, whether it's texting, and if I'm lucky enough to have a phone call to fit that in, which I try to make a priority, but then life happens. But our relationship, both of us, all three of us, is through a phone and through text. And just to be able to have this space where I can see both of your beautiful faces and be able to have this conversation just like completely changed my day for me.
I think if I'm going to just muse on a glimmer, realizing how cathartic this kind of conversation is for me. I think I live in such a way that I have to mask so much of myself. Being here is a huge risk, especially in the body that I'm in right now. And I'm grateful for just holding space with the both of you, and allowing me to just share a piece of my story, and hoping that somebody will be able to resonate a little bit with what I've alluded to. I know I didn't go into too many details, but just recognizing that life is hard, and this has especially made it a little less difficult today, being in conversation with the both of you.
Well, your turn.
Well, as I mentioned, my wife is pregnant, 22-ish weeks pregnant. And I got to feel the baby kick for the first time this week.
Oh.
Yeah. Or move or do something. I don't know what it was doing. I think it was kicking. It's been moving a lot. They have been moving a lot, which has been amazing. So that was just this week that I think that that I was able to start feeling that. So that's makes it
love
very,
that.
very real. And yeah, very exciting.
That's awesome. Well, Jasmine, thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank
taking this
you.
time.
Yeah, for sure. I hope a little piece of my story was helpful.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Life and Death Podcast. Please be sure to leave us a review and comment to let us know what you thought of the episode. And don't forget to follow us so you never miss an update. You can email us at lifeanddeathpodcast@gmail.com. You'll find Jenna on Instagram under the handle Jenna Marie Life Coaching, and I, Noelle, can be found at Noelle E. Carlin.
Living death through ups and downs, finding smiles beyond the frowns. Stay with us, we'll light the way. See you next time, bright and gay.